So, you want to build an A-frame house. Maybe you've had the vision of finding vacant land and building a getaway cabin, but the biggest problem is that you don't know where to start or even if you can afford it. We put together 5 key tips that you should consider before diving in. My wife and I are architects, both with over a decade of experience in the construction industry, but more importantly, we're right smack in the middle of building our own A-frame house from the ground up, and there's a lot of lessons that we've learned. Let us be your guide to see if building an A-frame cabin is right for you. First off, you need to consider the size you're building. Is it a 500 square foot, 1-bedroom, 1-bath mini cabin that you're building with your own hands? Or is it a 2,500 square foot, 5-bedroom, 3-bath, mega-sized A-frame? And is this your personal house or something you're going to Airbnb? To limit the variables, let's assume that we're building something in between. A 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in the US, and you're using it as both a family getaway and a vacation rental. Tip number 1, do as much upfront research on your land before purchasing it. So you've identified a piece of land that you want to buy, or maybe you already own vacant land. Well, there are several things you need to make sure of before moving forward. A, make sure the land is buildable. That means ordering a soil and perk test to determine the soil's absorption rate for a septic system. You can also find out if you're on wetlands, bedrock, etc. While we were in escrow for our land, we did the soil and perk test and found out that the soil was only 20 inches deep with bedrock below that. At the time, we didn't know what the consequences of that would be, but later found out that it was very costly because we had to jackhammer the entire footprint for our foundation and pay for a more expensive type of septic system. B, hire a surveyor to inspect the land for any potential issues or additional costs during the construction process. Once again, we made the mistake of not getting a surveyor until after closing and found out that the road bordering our plot was actually built on the next door neighbor's lot. And in this case, we got very lucky because we gained a bit of square footage. Imagine how it would have felt if it were the other way around. C, know if your land is completely off the grid, partially off the grid, or has utility hookups. Every additional utility is costly and something you'll have to account for in your pro forma. This can include installing a well, septic and leach field, electricity, and so forth. Finally, check with the borough, town, or HOA ordinances on short-term rentals because it is possible that they are not allowed. If your strategy is to generate some income from this A-frame, then we suggest looking for land elsewhere. Tip number 2, do everything you can to avoid buying in an HOA. If we were to do this all over again, we would not have bought in an HOA for several reasons. There are annual fees, occasional assessment fees, and rental fees. Sometimes, like in our case, there are building size and design restrictions that you would have to adhere to. We did know that our building had to be a minimum 1,600 square feet, but only found out later that the exterior cladding and roof could not be the color black like we wanted, and instead had to be an approved earth tone. One of the riskier aspects of buying land in an HOA are the limitations and fees that they can put on your home as a short-term rental. They can assess an annual fee, temporary membership fees, administration fees, gate fees, all kinds of fees. And it's up to you to determine if the cost of renting your home out as a vacation rental is even profitable. Finally, on top of that, if several guests at rentals in your HOA are having big parties, they can lead to heavier restrictions, if not banning short-term rentals altogether. But if you can't avoid buying in an HOA because you found that perfect lakeside plot at a great price, then just simply have a backup plan for the worst case scenario. That might mean researching the market for 30-plus day midterm rentals or even long-term rentals. Or maybe just enjoy it for yourself. In our location in the Poconos, we couldn't find land at a decent price that was not in an HOA, and ultimately the pros outweighed the cons. Okay, so you found your perfect piece of land and you're finally ready to build. Here's tip number 3. Don't buy floor plans online. We've seen several cases of people buying A-frame plans online and then realizing that they simply can't build from them because they're missing too much information or detail. Plans that you buy online may be a good starting point, but it cannot take into account existing site conditions. Most don't include structural drawings. They don't account for local building codes and sometimes don't correspond to the available materials in your area. Just recently, someone asked Rikako to sign off on one of these online architecture plans, and it included 0 structural details. Of course, she politely declined. Instead, talk to your local builder or GC first. Many already have in-house architecture templates that have already been tested and built. And if you want something a bit more custom, then talk with an architect, because, if you're spending all this money, why not design the building exactly the way you want it? In the end, you'll most likely need an architect to stamp the drawings and file for a permit anyway. Another option is to buy a kit home from a company like Avring. The advantage there is that they not only provide architecture and structural plans, but they also provide the construction materials used to build the house. However, just know that when you buy a kit house, every upgrade or change to the design is an added cost, and there are costs outside of the scope they provide that you'll need to take into account. Finally, your builder and their subs may have their own means and methods of assembling the pieces, which may conflict with the kit's instructions. Tip number 4, don't use cost per square foot to estimate the construction cost. One frequent question people will ask you on a new build is how much your building costs per square foot. Because of its slanted walls, we saw that there's no consistency to how people measure square footage on A-frames. When we go to a site like Zillow, we'll frequently see A-frames that have a similar building footprint and height to our building, but have 30% more square footage. We don't know how they're calculating this, but our best guess is that they're getting their square footage calculation from the height of the finished floor. We get our total square footage from 2018 IRC code that requires your cut line to be 5 foot high from the finished floor, hence a seemingly smaller building. Another way in which the size of an A-frame doesn't correlate directly to cost is that building a smaller building doesn't necessarily lead to that much more savings than a regular or larger size building. If you were to build a 1,500 square foot A-frame, it would not be half the cost of a 3,000 square foot A-frame. For example, if both needed a septic system, the smaller A-frame septic system would not be half the price. Even though there will be less concrete for the foundation of a smaller A-frame, there's still mobilization costs involved in bringing the concrete, equipment, and workers to the site. The best way to get accurate pricing on your new build is to get a quote from a GC or builder directly. Tip number 5, know your numbers inside and out and build in contingency for unforeseen expenses. Contrary to popular opinion, A-frame houses are not cheaper to build than a traditional house of comparable size. The rafters themselves, if using engineered lumber, can offset any savings you may get from the building's simple triangular geometry. If you choose to use a metal standing seam roof, which is pretty typical for an A-frame, that will be much more costly than an asphalt shingle roof. As with all new builds, there will be unforeseen expenses that come up during the construction process, so build in a contingency of around 5 to 10% of your budgeted construction cost. Until our framing was up and the building was watertight, we had no idea how large of a temperature difference there would be between upstairs and downstairs. It basically felt like a sauna up there because of the trapped heat in the upstairs bedroom. We opted for a 2-zone heating system, which cost us an extra $3,500. A good, experienced GC will have the foresight to warn you about the potential issues or additional costs, but it's near impossible to avoid unforeseen expenses and delays due to the logistical complexity of construction. Finally, do your own numbers. Maybe you've watched a few people break down the numbers of their entire build, providing costs all the way down to the price of nails. We even provide a detailed breakdown in our videos, but these costs are specific to our project. We are in a high labor cost area in the Northeast compared to somewhere in the South. So every new build is different from its location to the cost of land, cost of materials and finishes, GC and subcontractor fees, and so forth. I hope these tips were helpful in giving you a better sense of what to expect before building an A-frame cabin. As we get further along in our new build, we'll do a follow-up video to get more into the details of what to expect when you're in construction. Thanks for watching the video.